The waves of the Arabian Sea were restless that night, but inside the small fishing village of Dara Bay the world seemed still. A young man named Ayan, barely 20, was fixing his father's old fishing net. His clothes were patched, his shoes worn thin, and yet there was a spark in his eyes, the kind of spark that comes from a heart that refuses to give up. Ayan loved the sea. It was his playground, his teacher, and his escape. But the villagers often mocked him. "You'll never be a real sailor, Ayan," the old fisherman would say. "You're just a dreamer. And dreamers don't survive out there." He didn't care. What they didn't know was that Ayan had a secret. He could understand animals. Not in words exactly, but in feelings and a connection so deep that one look into a creature's eyes told him everything he needed to know. One evening, as he walked along the pier, he spotted a massive cargo ship anchored far out in the bay. The logo read, "The Floating Ark." It was a rare sight. A privately funded rescue vessel transporting hundreds of endangered animals to sanctuaries around the world. Ayan's eyes widened. He had read about the ship in the newspapers. It carried elephants, tigers, rare birds, even a pair of snow leopards. To him, this wasn't just a ship. It was a miracle floating on water. But the miracle wouldn't last. The storm clouds forming on the horizon told a story of their own. And the sea had a way of whispering warnings only he could hear. That night, lying in bed, Ayan felt something tugging at his chest, an unease that wouldn't let him sleep. The next morning, the village woke to chaos. A radio broadcast crackled through the old speaker in the marketplace. "Mayday, mayday. This is the Floating Ark. Engine failure. Taking on water. Coordinates." The voice was drowned by static, but Ayan froze in place. The ship was sinking. Without a second thought, he ran to the docks. Fishermen shook their heads. "It's suicide," one said. "That storm will swallow you before you even reach them." "But there are lives on that ship," Ayan shouted. "Not just people, animals. They can't fend for themselves." No one moved. No one cared enough. So with his father's tiny wooden fishing boat, an old compass, and nothing but his courage, Ayan pushed off into the roaring sea. Waves slammed into his boat. The wind howled. At one point, he thought he saw lightning split the sky in half. Hours felt like days until through the sheets of rain, he saw it, the Floating Ark, leaning dangerously to one side, its deck crawling with terrified animals. The sound was haunting. The trumpeting of elephants, the screeches of parrots, the deep growl of a cornered tiger. But what struck him most were their eyes, fear, helplessness, and in some strange way, trust. Reaching the ship was one thing. Getting aboard was another. The side of the vessel towered above him like a wall. Ayan shouted for help, and a few crew members appeared at the railing. They tossed him a rope ladder, their faces pale and desperate. When his feet finally touched the steel deck, the scene was worse than he imagined. Water was pouring in from a massive gash in the hull. The lower deck, and where most of the animals were, was already knee-deep in water. A crewman grabbed his arm. "We've radioed for help, but they won't reach us in time." "The animals," his voice broke. "We can't move them all before she goes under." Ayan's heart raced. He looked around, the cages, the chains, the chaos. He knew what he had to do. He started with the smaller animals, unlocking cages and guiding them toward lifeboats. The parrots flew into the stormy sky, circling back as if to cheer him on. He freed monkeys, antelopes, and rare birds, moving faster than he thought possible. But when he reached the larger animals, the real challenge began. 2 young elephants were chained near the flooded lower deck, trumpeting in panic. The water was rising fast. Ayan waded through, unhooking their chains. One elephant's eye met his, and in that moment the noise of the storm faded. It was as if the creature was saying, "I trust you." With the help of 2 crewmen, they led the elephants toward the loading ramp. But halfway there, the ship lurched violently, sending one elephant crashing into the railing. Ayan threw himself forward, pushing with all his strength until the animal found its footing. By the time they got the elephants into the last lifeboat, Ayan's body was trembling from exhaustion. But he wasn't done. The snow leopards were still trapped. The leopard's cage was wedged against a wall of crates, with the ship tilting more each minute. The cage could slide into the water at any second. Ayan climbed over the crates, the cold metal biting into his hands, and smashed the lock open with an iron rod. One leopard hesitated, then leapt toward him, not in attack but in trust. They bolted toward the deck just as another wave crashed over the side, soaking them to the bone. The last lifeboat was full, but Ayan refused to leave them behind. Instead, he grabbed a floating cargo raft, tied the leopards to its center, and pushed it into the stormy waters, holding on as they drifted away from the sinking ship. Minutes later, with a deafening groan, the floating ark disappeared beneath the waves. They drifted for hours until, at dawn, the Coast Guard found them. The rescue boats pulled them aboard, crew and animals alike. News cameras were already rolling. Within days, Ayan's face was on every news channel in the world. Headlines read, "Young fisherman saves hundreds of animals from sinking ark." The boy with the heart of the sea. Animal sanctuaries across the globe offered him positions. The president of an international wildlife organization called him the bravest young man alive. But for Ayan, the true reward was seeing the elephants, the leopards and the other animals alive, safe and free. When he returned to his village, the same fisherman who once mocked him stood in silence, then broke into applause. He had not only saved the animals, he had saved his own dignity, his dreams, and the very soul of his village. And somewhere deep inside he knew the sea would always call him. But now the whole world would listen when he answered,